There is a particular kind of dread that arrives with a crash, a feeling you can't quite identify, sitting in the back of your throat like smoke from a fire you thought you put out years ago. I felt it the morning my neighbor, Celia Marsh, knocked on my front door with a casserole dish and an expression that told me the casserole wasn't the real reason she had come. Nadia, she said, setting the dish on my kitchen counter and not quite meeting her eyes. I don't know if I should be telling you this. Greg says I should mind my own business, but if it were me, I'd want to know. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and looked at her. Celia was one of those women who delivered bad news gently. I had always loved that about her, but in that moment, I dreaded it. Just say it, Sel. Darren Holt moved back to Fairview. The name hit me somewhere behind my sternum. Darren Holt. The man I had dated for 2 years before my 31st birthday. I had ended things with the kind of cut that leaves the other person standing in an operating theater blinking at the ceiling, wondering where the anesthetic went. It had needed to be that way, and I'm not going to dress it up. At first, he'd been possessive in the small ways that seem flattering, the constant texts, the surprise visits, the jealousy I saw, and then in the larger ways, the way his moods filled every room, the way my friends started declining invitations because he would be there. I began editing myself in my own home. When I ended it, he didn't take it well. He showed up at my office, he called my mother, he sat in a car outside my apartment for 3 evenings in a row until my brother Dion drove over and had a conversation with him that I was never fully briefed on. After that, Darren disappeared from my life. Fairview had moved on, and so did I. 4 years on, I was married to Gray da Costa, a civil engineer with patient eyes and a laugh that still made me feel like I had won first prize. We had a terrace house on Linden Street, a dog named Dragon, and a life built quietly on the kind of ordinary happiness that the internet tells you isn't enough but actually is. He's renting the old Paulson property, Celia said, watching my face. The one on Alcott Road. That's only 2 streets away, Nadia. I told her I appreciated her telling me. I told her it was fine because at that moment I believed myself when I said it. 3 weeks after Celia's visit, things started so cleverly that I didn't recognize it as a beginning. Gray came home from work on a Thursday evening with a tension around his jaw that he tried to hide and didn't quite manage. He kissed me, asked about my day, ate his chicken pasta I had made from scratch because I knew it was his favorite, and he said almost nothing. Long day, I asked. Something like that. He looked at his plate. Who were you on the phone with this afternoon? Around 4? I thought a little bit, then said, my sister Renee. Why? No reason. But he was still looking at the plate. I didn't press. Gray was entitled to difficult days. We both were. I put it down to stress at work. There was a bridge tender project that had been giving him grief for months, then I moved on. The second incident came the following Tuesday. I was in our local grocery store when I ran into Amanda Tyson, who was on the PTA with me and who I genuinely liked. We stood in the cereal aisle for 20 minutes talking about nothing in particular. When I got home, Gray was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up when I came in and something moved across his face. You were gone a long time? I bumped into Amanda. We were catching up. He nodded, then looked back at the screen. I stood in the doorway for a moment, shopping bags cutting into my palms, trying to identify what had just changed between us and failing miserably. The third incident was a phone call. It came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden pulling up the last of the winter dead plants when Gray appeared in the doorway, holding my phone out to me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was a kind of controlled blankness, the face people make when they are trying not to make a face. Someone called for you, he said. A man. He said you'd know who it was. He said to tell you that you left something behind. My hands went still in the soil. What man? Did he give a name? No. Gray set the phone down on the garden wall. He just said you'd know. I picked up the phone, but it showed no name or number, a blocked call lasting 47 seconds. I didn't tell Gray about Darren Holt in that moment. I've replayed that decision 1,000 times since. I told myself I was protecting him from unnecessary alarm, but the truth was messier. Some part of me didn't want to open that old room. It did not want Gray to know the full story of what I had once been involved in, or how badly it had ended. I didn't want him to know about the car parked outside my apartment 3 nights in a row. I think I was ashamed of having once been that woman, the one who stayed too long. I told him it must have been a wrong number. Gray looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Okay," but his eyes said something else entirely. I know now, in retrospect, how precisely Darren calibrated each move. I have filled in the gaps myself, using what I eventually discovered, and the portrait it makes is of a man who had spent years planning this, who didn't come back to Fairview on impulse. He had a purpose. What Gray received over the course of 6 weeks was a masterclass in curated suggestion, an anonymous email to his work account containing a photograph of me standing outside a coffee shop on Briar Street, laughing with a man Gray didn't recognize. The photograph was genuine because the man was my old colleague James, who had been in town for a conference, but it had been cropped and framed in a way that looked like a secret meeting. Then there was a handwritten note left in our letterbox, which Gray found before I did, that said, "She's not who you think she is." A voicemail was left on our landline, and yes, we still had a landline because Gray's mother called it every Sunday. It was a man's voice, low and calm, saying, "I think your wife is seeing someone I thought you should know. I don't want to get involved. I just couldn't not say something." Then there was an envelope slid under Gray's office door, addressed to him by name, containing a printed phone record. Our phone record, my number, and a mobile number I didn't recognize, with calls annotated by hand. The annotations were false. The calls had never happened, but the document looked real enough. It looked like the kind of thing a person would have if they were conducting an affair. Gray sat on all of it. That was the thing about my husband that Darren had understood and weaponized. Gray wasn't the kind of man who reacted immediately. He gathered information and turned things over. He sat with his evidence the way a geologist sits with a rock until he understood what he was looking at. He told me none of it. He slowly started withdrawing from me. The small touch points of our daily life began to disappear. The coffee he used to bring me in bed on weekends, the hand at the small of my back when we were out together. Our conversations that used to come freely were now forced. I noticed all of it, but still, I told myself he was stressed about the bridge project. I told myself it would pass. I was a woman performing confidence I didn't feel in a house that was slowly becoming unfamiliar. My friend Maggie called me on a Wednesday evening when Gray was at a work dinner, and she was 3 sentences into asking how things were before I started crying. Maggie had been my best friend since university. She was also, and I say this with deep affection, incapable of sugarcoating anything. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her about the phone call, about Gray's changed behavior, the feeling that had settled over our house. There was a silence on the other end. "Nadia, has Darren Holt come up at all lately?" The question landed like a slap in my face. "Why would you ask that?" "Because," Maggie said carefully, "he messaged me on Instagram 2 weeks ago, said he was back in Fairview. He said he hoped we could all put the past behind us. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think—" She stopped. "Oh no." "What do you mean, oh no?" "I mean, I think I need to ask you some questions about your recent movements, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer them, because I think something is happening that we haven't clocked yet." Maggie came over the following evening with a bottle of wine and the focused energy of a woman who had spent a career in HR rooting out workplace manipulation and knew what systematic behavior looked like. We sat at my kitchen table and she asked me to walk her through every strange incident of the past 6 weeks in chronological order. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "He's building a case," she said. "Not against you, against your marriage. Every single thing you've described is designed to be seen by Gray, not confronted by you." "But why? It's been 4 years. Why now?" "Because he planned it for 4 years," she said. "This isn't impulse, it's architecture." I thought about that word. Architecture. Something built deliberately, something with load-bearing walls. "Maggie, what do I do?" She looked at me across the table. "First, tonight, you tell Gray everything before he hears another version of it that isn't yours." I called Gray before he left the office and told him I needed to talk to him when he got home. Something in my voice must have told him this wasn't the kind of conversation that could wait. He was home within 40 minutes. We sat in the living room. Dragon lay across my feet, which helped. Then I told him everything, not in the edited version I had been composing in my head on the drive back from the wine shop. I told him all of it. Darren, the 2 years, the end, the car outside the apartment, Dion's intervention, my silence when the mysterious call came, my failure to say what I suspected was happening. I told him I had been ashamed, that I had been wrong to say nothing. I told him that whatever he had been feeling these past weeks, whatever he had been told or shown, the person on the other side of it wasn't the woman he married, but the man I was describing. Gray listened to all of it without speaking. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Dragon's tail thumped twice against the floor. I need to show you something, Gray said. He went to his study and came back with a folder. Inside was the photograph, the note, the printout, the voicemail he had recorded on his phone. My stomach turned. I didn't come to you with it, he said, because I didn't know what to think and because I didn't want to think what I was starting to think. What were you thinking? He met my eyes. They were red at the corners in a way I had never seen before. I was thinking about calling a lawyer. Something cracked open in the room. Gray. I know, he said. I know now, but I want you to understand what I almost did, how close I was because of him. I reached across the coffee table and took his hand. He let me hold it, and after a moment, he closed his fingers around mine. Tell me what you need from me, I said. He looked at the folder on the table, then back at me. I need us to finish this, he said, together. I had been married to Grey Costa for 6 years. In that moment, I fell in love with him all over again. You want to know what I'm like in a crisis? Here is the honest answer. I'm calm in the way that cold water is calm, still surface, very deep and quite capable of pulling you under. Grey is different. He is methodical and patient. Darren Holt had chosen the wrong couple to dismantle. We spent a weekend cataloging everything. Gray's folder, my phone records, the real ones, which showed no calls to the number on his forged printout. The timestamps on the email to his work account, which Maggie's IT contact traced to a VPN that had been routed through a server in the next county. The handwritten note, which we photographed and preserved. We also called Dion. My brother is a quiet man with a background in corporate security and a particular dislike of people who use silence as a weapon. He came over on Sunday with his wife, Amara, who was a paralegal and who spread our evidence across the dining room table. This is harassment, Amara said, without looking up from the phone record printout. Possibly stalking, depending on how long he's been monitoring movement. The forged document is criminal fraud. The voicemail is potentially criminal intimidation. She set down the printout. You have grounds, Nadia. Grounds for what? Gray asked. Grounds for making his life very uncomfortable, she said, legally and permanently. Dion looked at me from across the table with the expression he had worn our entire childhood, the one that asks, how do you want to play this? I want him to feel what I felt, I said quietly. I want him to feel watched, suspected, doubted. I want everything he built against me turned around and aimed back at him, and I want it to be real. Nobody disagreed with me. What happened next unfolded over 4 weeks. I'll explain it in the order we built it. Amara filed a formal harassment report with the police, lodging the forged phone record as evidence of criminal fraud. Darren didn't know about this yet. That was by design. We needed him still in motion. Dayon made contact with James, my old colleague from the coffee shop photograph, who was, as it turned out, extremely angry when we told him his image had been used without consent in a campaign to destabilize my marriage. James was also a solicitor. He added his own letter to the legal file. Maggie reached out to 3 other women in Fairview who had been connected to Darren over the years, former neighbors and former colleagues. She was looking for a pattern and she found 2. One of them, a woman named Bridget, who had worked with Darren at a logistics company before his departure from Fairview, told Maggie that when she had turned down his romantic interest, her performance reviews had mysteriously begun declining. She had resigned before it escalated, but had kept records of what she described as a systematic smear campaign against her professionally. Another woman, Karen, had dated him briefly after I did. She had been followed. He does this, Maggie told me over the phone in a flat voice. This is what he does. You weren't targeted because you're special, Nadia. You were targeted because you got away and it broke something in him. He can't let anyone go. It should have made me feel less alone, but in some ways, it made me feel heavier. Gray, meanwhile, was handling the piece that required the most patience. He had been quietly compiling, through a contact in the planning office, Information about Darren's rental situation, Alcott Road, the Paulson property. Gray had been in Fairview his whole life, and he knew that property. He knew that it had changed hands twice since old Frank Paulson died, and that its current landlord, a property developer named Stuart Gaines, had a reputation for swift and decisive action when his tenants caused problems. Gray called Stuart Gaines on Tuesday morning. He was on the phone for 19 minutes. He came downstairs afterwards and made himself a cup of tea. Done? I asked. Stuart Gaines has received a copy of the harassment report, Gray said. He also received a letter from Amara explaining that the property at Alcott Road may become subject to a civil order if the investigation proceeds. Stuart Gaines doesn't want legal attention on his properties. He's issued a notice. A notice already? Stuart Gaines isn't a patient man, Gray said, sipping his tea. Then came the part that was mine, the part that I had been saving. Darren Holt had a sister who is very close to him, named Deborah, who still lived in Fairview. He had spoken about her constantly when we were together. She was the soft center of him, the version of himself he wanted to protect. I had always liked Deborah, and she had liked me, so I called her. I was calm when I did it. I was the still water calm I described earlier, full beneath the surface, not a ripple showing. Deborah, I said, I need to talk to you about your brother, and I need you to listen to everything before you say anything. She listened. I told her what Darren had done. I told her about Gray's folder, about Bridget and Karen. I told her that her brother, the man she had spent a lifetime protecting, had spent years planning to destroy the life I had built after I left him. Deborah was quiet for a very long time. I didn't know, she said. Her voice was very small. Nadia, I swear to you, I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I'm not calling to hurt you. I'm calling because he's going to need someone when this lands on him, and because if he hears it from you, all of it, what we know, what we can prove, what happens next, he might choose to leave quietly, and that would be better for everyone. She said she would talk to him. She called back 2 days later. He won't leave quietly, she said. Her voice had changed. Something in her had closed down since our first call. Something that happens when you look clearly at someone you love and see the truth of them. He's angry. He says you can't prove anything. Tell him I said to check his letterbox. That morning, Amara had hand-delivered a legal letter to the Paulson property summarizing the harassment complaint, the fraud charge, the witness statements from Bridget and Karen, and the civil suit that would follow if Darren did not remove himself from Fairview within 30 days. We had also sent a copy to his employer. He had taken a remote position with a data management company when he returned to town. His manager's name was at the bottom of their company website. Amara had been thorough. The eviction notice was already in process. The legal letter had arrived. His employer had received correspondence. His sister now knew who he really was. It wasn't vigilante justice. Every single piece of it was legitimate, documented, and evidenced, but it landed the way I needed it to land, like a building coming down, floor by floor in controlled sequence. 23 days after Amara delivered the letter, Darren Holt rang our doorbell. I had thought about this moment. I'd prepared for it. I'd imagined anger or threats or the cold performance of innocence that certain types of men are very good at. I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. Gray answered the door. I stood in the hallway behind him. Dragon sat at my feet with the loyal gravity of a dog who senses atmosphere without understanding it. Darren looked small. That was the only word. He had always been a physically large man, but standing on our doorstep in the grey February light with the eviction notice in process and his employer's HR team apparently in conversation with Amara's letter, he looked like a man who had been inflated and slowly let out. He looked at Gray first, then past him at me. I just want to say, he started. You don't get to say, Gray said. His voice was very quiet and very steady, and it filled the doorway completely. You don't get to come to my home and say anything. You had your say. For 6 weeks you had your say, to my wife and to me, through a letterbox and a voicemail and a forged document. That's done. Darren looked at me again. Something in his eyes that I recognized, the dawning understanding that the story he had told himself about this situation had been wrong from the beginning. I thought, he tried. I know what you thought, I said. You thought I'd be afraid of you. You thought Gray would leave. You thought if you broke this, I'd be alone and diminished, and you'd have evened some score you've been keeping in your head for 4 years. But here's what you didn't account for, Darren. You didn't account for the fact that I told my husband everything, and you didn't account for what my husband would do when he knew the truth. Darren opened his mouth. He closed it again. The letter from Amara Mensah explains your options, I said. I suggest you read it carefully. I also suggest that when you decide where to move next, you choose somewhere further than 2 streets away. Gray closed the door. We stood in our hallway together, in our house on Linden Street. Dragon pressed himself against both of us simultaneously in the artless way of golden retrievers who don't understand geometry but understand belonging. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Well, Gray said finally. Well, I agreed. I don't know who started it. We were both laughing. We laughed until we had to lean on each other to stay upright. Dragon barked once, offended at being excluded from the joke. Darren left Fairview 17 days later. He didn't fight the eviction or respond to Amara's civil suit, which she told us was itself a kind of concession. A man with nothing to hide fights. A man who knows what can be proven doesn't. His employer placed him on administrative leave while their HR process ran. Bridget submitted her own account to that process. I don't know what the outcome was. I didn't need to know. Deborah called me once more, a week after Darren left. She didn't defend him. She only said, I'm sorry for what he did to you and your husband and to those other women. Then she said she needed some time. I said I understood, and that was the last time we spoke. It cost something, revenge, even the legal kind, even the justified kind. I spent weeks in a state of focused rage that I wore like a second skin. There were mornings when I woke up and the first thought in my head was a next move rather than a prayer or a plan for breakfast, and that frightened me a little. There is a version of this story where the obsession outlasts the threat, where I turn into something I don't recognize. I had to choose repeatedly not to let that happen. The thing that saved me was that I had someone to come back to. Gray and I began couples therapy in March. We went to therapy just because we wanted to look clearly at what had almost happened. Our therapist, Dr. Eddie Martins, had calm eyes and a talent for asking the right question at the right moment, helped us understand what the experience had exposed. My weakness, I learned, is that I carry old shame alone and call it protection. Gray's weakness is that he gathers evidence in silence and calls it patience. Separately, those tendencies had very nearly handed Darren Holt exactly what he wanted. Together, when we finally stopped doing them, we were something else entirely. My strength is that I see the architecture of a thing. I can trace the structure of a plan, find its load-bearing points, and apply pressure where it will do the most damage. Gray's strength is that he knows people. He knew Stuart Gaines would act quickly. He knew which call to make and when to make it. The scale of justice, Dr. Martins once told us, doesn't balance because both sides are equal. It balances because each side brings its full weight. I've thought about that many times since. It is autumn now, and the garden is doing something beautiful. Gray planted dahlias in the spring, deep red ones, almost burgundy, and they came up exactly as he said they would, which should surprise me less than it does. We had Maggie and her partner over for dinner last Saturday. Dion and Amara came with their new baby, who slept through the entire meal and woke up exactly in time for dessert, which felt like sound judgment. Celia and Greg from next door leaned over the fence at one point and we invited them in, and by 10 o'clock the kitchen was full and loud and warm in the way that kitchens are only warm when people inside them actually want to be there. Gray caught my eye across the room at some point over Dion's shoulder, through the noise, and gave me that particular look. The one that means, this is what we kept. I thought about Darren in that moment. A woman who has come out on the other side of something and found that the other side looks like this kitchen, these people, this man. He thought he could reach back into my past and use it to collapse my future. He was wrong about almost everything. I was the wrong woman to come back for, because when it mattered, when the thing I loved most was standing on the edge of something irreversible, I found the words. I opened the room I had kept closed and I told my husband the truth, and he believed me. In the end, that was the only revenge that actually mattered. Not the legal letters, the eviction, or the employer's HR process, though all of it was necessary and all of it was right. What mattered was that Darren Holt spent 4 years planning the destruction of a marriage, and when he was done, the marriage was still standing. We're still standing, and he was gone. This is another Story Junkie original. Thank you for spending time with us. Please subscribe to this channel. It means more to us than you realize. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Stay safe and God bless.